Lieutenant Do-hyun Park stood in front of the large window in Admiral Ki-tae-lee's office, looking at his new command. The TSS Perseverance floated in the space dock, its worn hull telling stories of decades of service. Most people would see an old, tired ship that should have been scrapped years ago. Do-hyun saw something different. He saw potential. "Lieutenant Park, are you listening to me?" Admiral Lee's sharp voice cut through Do-hyun's thoughts. Do-hyun turned around quickly. "Yes, sir. You were explaining the ship's current condition." The Admiral's office was neat and clean, with medals and awards covering one wall. A large desk made of real wood, a luxury in space, dominated the room. Admiral Lee sat behind it, looking at Do-hyun with clear disapproval. "As I was saying," the Admiral continued, "the Perseverance is a Mark II support vessel. It's old, but it still works. Barely." He picked up a tablet and read from it. "Life support operates at 82% efficiency. The main engines need constant maintenance. The weapons systems," he shook his head, "well, they work, sometimes." Do-hyun kept his face neutral, but his mind was already racing with ideas. He had spent 6 years as an engineer at the Seoul Institute of Technology before joining the Space Force. He knew old ships often had hidden strengths that newer captains didn't understand. "Sir, if I may ask, why me?" Do-hyun asked carefully. Admiral Lee's face hardened. "You want the truth. You're being punished, Lieutenant. That incident with the experimental engine design on your last ship, the one that almost blew up the entire engineering deck, the Admiralty hasn't forgotten." Do-hyun wanted to argue. His design had worked perfectly in simulations. The only reason it had failed was because his commanding officer had pushed the system too hard, too fast. But he stayed quiet. "Your choices are simple," Admiral Lee continued. "Take command of the Perseverance, or resign your commission. The decision is yours." The Admiral's voice made it clear which choice he expected Do-hyun to make. "I accept the command, sir," Do-hyun said without hesitation. The Admiral looked disappointed. He had clearly expected, and perhaps hoped, that Do-hyun would quit. "Very well. Report to Docking Bay 7 at 800 tomorrow. Your new first officer will meet you there." As Do-hyun walked through the space station's corridors after leaving the Admiral's office, his mind was already working on plans. The Perseverance might be old, but that meant its systems were simple. Simple systems could be modified, improved, changed in ways that the designers never imagined. The next morning, Do-hyun arrived at Docking Bay 7:15 minutes early. He was surprised to find someone already waiting there. A woman in a crisp uniform stood by the airlock, checking something on her tablet. "Lieutenant Ju-won Choi," she said, looking up as he approached. "Your new first officer." Do-hyun studied her for a moment. Her record had been in the files he'd reviewed last night. Top quarter of her class at the academy. 3 years of experience on patrol ships. More importantly, she had a reputation for being adaptable and good at keeping secrets. "Lieutenant Park," he replied, "ready to see our new home." Jae-won's expression stayed professional, but Do-hyun caught a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Sir, I should warn you. The crew's morale is not good." "The last captain." "I know about Captain Hae-yul Kim," Do-hyun interrupted gently. "The failed first contact mission, the diplomatic incident, the court-martial." He smiled slightly. "Things are going to be different now." They walked through the airlock and into the Perseverance. The ship's corridors were clean but worn, with patches of newer metal showing where repairs had been made over the years. The lighting flickered occasionally, another item for the maintenance list. Their first stop was engineering. As they entered, Do-hyun heard arguing voices. "It's not going to work. The power coupling is too old," a male voice said. "It will work if you would just listen to me about the bypass circuit," a female voice answered. Do-hyun and Ji-won rounded a corner to find 2 officers standing over an open panel. Tools and parts were scattered around them. Chief Engineer Myra Song, Jaiwan said quietly to Du Hyun. And that's Assistant Engineer Yijun Kang. They're always like this. Do Hyun watched them for a moment. Despite their argument, he could see they worked well together. Mei Ray would point at something, and Yijun would immediately hand her the exact tool she needed, even while disagreeing with her. Attention on deck, Jae-won called out. The engineers snapped to attention, finally noticing their new captain. As you were, Do Hyun said quickly. He walked over to look at the open panel. Power coupling problems. Yes, sir, Mei said. The Mark ILA series used a non-standard connection type. We can't get replacement parts anymore, so we have to jury-rig solutions. Do Hyun leaned in closer, examining the coupling. Have you tried reversing the polarity and using a Type 4 adapter? If you adjust the power flow timing. Mei Ray's eyes widened. Yijun looked surprised and interested. That could work, Mei Ray said slowly. But it's not in any of the repair manuals. Sometimes the manuals don't have all the answers, Do Hyun replied. He straightened up. Chief Song, I'd like a full report on the ship's systems. The real status, not the official one. Everything that's broken, everything that's barely working, and everything that could be improved. Sir, Mei Ray looked uncertain. Some of our solutions aren't exactly regulation standard. Engineer Song, this ship is so old that half the regulations don't even apply to it anymore. I need to know what we're really working with. Mei Ray and Yijun exchanged looks. Then Mei Ray smiled, the first real smile Do Hyun had seen on the ship. You'll have it in 2 hours, sir, she said. The rest of the morning was spent touring the ship. The Perseverance wasn't large by modern standards. Just 12 decks, with a crew of 150. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in complexity. Decades of repairs and modifications had turned its systems into a maze that only the long-term crew members truly understood. By lunch, Do Hyun had met most of his senior staff. Besides Mei Ray and Yijun in engineering, there was Tactical Officer Jin Ho Kwon, a quiet man who knew every weapon on the ship, even the ones that weren't in the official inventory. Navigation Officer Soo Jin Yoon had been with the ship for 5 years and could plot courses through space that newer ships' computers said were impossible. The crew watched their new captain carefully. They had seen captains come and go, each one either trying to run the ship by the book and failing, or giving up and just doing the minimum until they could transfer out. But Do Hyun was different. He asked questions. He listened to answers. Most importantly, he understood the technical details that the crew discussed. At 1400 hours, Mei Ray delivered her report to Do Hyun's ready room. Ji-won was there too, sitting quietly and watching as Do Hyun read through the details. This is interesting, Do Hyun said finally. The main power core is running at 60% of its rated capacity. Yes, sir, Mei Ray replied. We had to reduce power to prevent overloads. But the core itself is actually capable of much more, Do Hyun mused. The Mark ILA series was over-engineered. They built in safety margins that modern ships don't have. He looked up at Mei Ray. What if we use that extra capacity? Sir, the power distribution system couldn't handle it, Mei Ray said. We'd blow out half the conduits in the ship. Not if we rebuilt the distribution system. Do Hyun stood up and walked to the room's small window. The cargo bays are mostly empty, right? Yes, sir. We're not used for transport missions anymore. Then we have space. Space we could use for new systems. Better systems. Do Hyun turned to face them. I have an idea. It's not exactly regulation standard. In fact, it's probably against several regulations, but it could turn this ship into something special. Jae-won spoke up for the first time. Sir, are you suggesting we modify the ship without proper authorization? Not exactly, Do Hyun said. We're going to repair the ship. If those repairs happen to include improvements, He smiled. Well, the regulations about repairs on Mark II ships are very open to interpretation. Mayray was looking more excited by the minute. The empty cargo bays could be converted to fabrication spaces. We have some old industrial replicators that still work. With some modification, they could produce most of what we need. How long would it take? Jai-1 asked, her professional concern warring with obvious interest. 3 months, Do-hyun said. Maybe 4. We'll need to work carefully, keep everything quiet. He looked at both women. This has to be voluntary. Anyone who's not comfortable with it can request a transfer. No questions asked. Jai-1 and Mayray exchanged looks. Then Jae-1 smiled. Sir, I think you'll find this crew is very good at keeping secrets, and they're even better at making impossible things work. Good, Do-hyun said, because what I have in mind is definitely impossible, at least according to the regulations. He pulled up a diagram on his tablet. Let me show you what I think we can do with this old ship. As he began to explain his ideas, both women leaned forward, their eyes widening. Outside the window, the Perseverance floated quietly in its dock, its worn hull hiding the changes that were about to begin. Changes that would turn the fleet's weakest ship into something that no one, human or alien, would ever expect. Jae-1's expression stayed professional, but Do-hyun caught a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Sir, I should warn you. The crew's morale is not good. The last captain. I know about Captain Hae-nyul Kim, Do-hyun interrupted gently. The failed first contact mission. The diplomatic incident. The court-martial. He smiled slightly. Things are going to be different now. They walked through the airlock and into the Perseverance. The ship's corridors were clean but worn, with patches of newer metal showing where repairs had been made over the years. The lighting flickered occasionally, another item for the maintenance list. Their first stop was engineering. As they entered, Do-hyun heard arguing voices. It's not going to work. The power coupling is too old. A male voice said. It will work if you would just listen to me about the bypass circuit. A female voice answered. Do-hyun and Jae-1 rounded a corner to find 2 officers standing over an open panel. Tools and parts were scattered around them. Chief Engineer Myra Song, Jae-1 said quietly to Do-hyun. And that's Assistant Engineer Yi-jun Kang. They're always like this. Do-hyun watched them for a moment. Despite their argument, he could see they worked well together. Mayray would point at something, and Yi-jun would immediately hand her the exact tool she needed, even while disagreeing with her. Attention on deck, Jae-1 called out. The engineers snapped to attention, finally noticing their new captain. As you were, Do-hyun said quickly. He walked over to look at the open panel. Power coupling problems. Yes, sir, Mayray said. The Mark IA series used a non-standard connection type. We can't get replacement parts anymore, so we have to jury-rig solutions. Do-hyun leaned in closer, examining the coupling. Have you tried reversing the polarity and using a Type 4 adapter? If you adjust the power flow timing. Mayray's eyes widened. Yi-jun looked surprised and interested. That could work, Mayray said slowly. But it's not in any of the repair manuals. Sometimes the manuals don't have all the answers, Do-hyun replied. He straightened up. Chief Song, I'd like a full report on the ship's systems. The real status, not the official one. Everything that's broken, everything that's barely working, and everything that could be improved. Sir, Mayray looked uncertain. Some of our solutions aren't exactly regulation standard. Engineer Song, this ship is so old that half the regulations don't even apply to it anymore. I need to know what we're really working with. Mayray and Yi-jun exchanged looks. Then Mayray smiled, the first real smile Do-hyun had seen on the ship. You'll have it in 2 hours, sir, she said. The rest of the morning was spent touring the ship. The Perseverance wasn't large by modern standards. Just 12 decks, with a crew of 150. But what it lacked in size, it made up for it in complexity. Decades of repairs and modifications had turned its systems into a maze that only the long-term crew members truly understood. By lunch, Du Hyun had met most of his senior staff. Besides Mai and Yi Jun in engineering, there was Tactical Officer Jin Ho Kwon, a quiet man who knew every weapon on the ship, even the ones that weren't in the official inventory. Navigation Officer Soo Jin Yoon had been with the ship for 5 years and could plot courses through space that newer ships' computers said were impossible. The crew watched their new captain carefully. They had seen captains come and go, each one either trying to run the ship by the book and failing or giving up and just doing the minimum until they could transfer out. But Du Hyun was different. He asked questions. He listened to answers. Most importantly, he understood the technical details that the crew discussed. At 1400 hours, Mi-Ray delivered her report to Du Hyun's ready room. Ji-won was there too, sitting quietly and watching as Du Hyun read through the details. "This is interesting," Du Hyun said finally. "The main power core is running at 60% of its rated capacity." "Yes, sir," Mi-Ray replied. "We had to reduce power to prevent overloads." "But the core itself is actually capable of much more," Du Hyun mused. The Mark IA series was over-engineered. They built in safety margins that modern ships don't have. He looked up at Mi-Ray. "What if we use that extra capacity?" "Sir, the power distribution system couldn't handle it," Mi-Ray said. "We'd blow out half the conduits in the ship." "Not if we rebuilt the distribution system." Du Hyun stood up and walked to the room's small window. "The cargo bays are mostly empty, right?" "Yes, sir. We're not used for transport missions anymore." "Then we have space. Space we could use for new systems. Better systems." Du Hyun turned to face them. "I have an idea. It's not exactly regulation standard. In fact, it's probably against several regulations, but it could turn this ship into something special." Ji-won spoke up for the first time. "Sir, are you suggesting we modify the ship without proper authorization?" "Not exactly," Du Hyun said. "We're going to repair the ship, if those repairs happen to include improvements." He smiled. "Well, the regulations about repairs on Mark II ships are very open to interpretation." Mi-Ray was looking more excited by the minute. The empty cargo bays could be converted to fabrication spaces. We have some old industrial replicators that still work. With some modification, they could produce most of what we need. "How long would it take?" Ji-won asked, her professional concern warring with obvious interest. 3 months, Du Hyun said. "Maybe 4. We'll need to work carefully, keep everything quiet." He looked at both women. "This has to be voluntary. Anyone who's not comfortable with it can request a transfer. No questions asked." Ji-won and Mi-Ray exchanged looks. Then Ji-won smiled. "Sir, I think you'll find this crew is very good at keeping secrets, and they're even better at making impossible things work." "Good," Du Hyun said, "because what I have in mind is definitely impossible. At least according to the regulations." He pulled up a diagram on his tablet. "Let me show you what I think we can do with this old ship." As he began to explain his ideas, both women leaned forward, their eyes widening. Outside the window, the Perseverance floated quietly in its dock, its worn hull hiding the changes that were about to begin. Changes that would turn the fleet's weakest ship into something that no one, human or alien, would ever expect. 1 month into Project Phoenix, the Perseverance's cargo bays looked nothing like their original design. Where there had once been empty space, now there were makeshift workshops. The air hummed with the sound of industrial replicators working day and night. The smell of hot metal and ozone filled the air. Chief Engineer Mi-Ray Song stood in Cargo Bay 3, now nicknamed the Workshop, looking at their latest creation. It was a power distribution node, but unlike anything in the official Space Force catalogs. The node combined old Mark II technology with modern engineering principles in ways that would make most fleet engineers nervous. It's ready for testing, Yi-jun said, walking up beside her. Dark circles under his eyes showed how hard he'd been working, but he was smiling. If this works, we can install the whole new power grid within 2 weeks. Mei Ray nodded, then pressed her communicator. Engineering to bridge. We're ready for the power test, Captain. Up on the bridge, Do-hyun sat in the captain's chair, looking at the main screen. The screen showed a diagram of the ship's power systems. Most of the lines were red, indicating they were running on the old system. One section, connected to the test node, was blinking yellow. All non-essential personnel have been evacuated from Cargo Bay 3. Jae-won reported from her station. Emergency teams are standing by. Do-hyun took a deep breath. Begin the test. Start at 10% power. In the workshop, Mei Ray and Yi-jun watched as the new node hummed to life. Numbers on their tablets showed power flowing through the system. 10% holding steady, Mei Ray reported. No temperature increase. Power flow is smooth. Increase to 25%, Do-hyun ordered. The hum grew louder. The node's cooling systems activated, releasing small puffs of steam. 25% stable, Mei Ray said. All readings normal. Request permission to go to 50%. Do-hyun looked at Jae-won. She nodded. Granted. Proceed to 50%. The node's hum changed pitch. More steam escaped from the cooling vents, but the readings remained steady. It's working, Yi-jun whispered. It's actually working. 75%, Mei Ray called out, her voice excited. The node was handling more power than any standard Space Force system could manage. The unique combination of old and new technology was doing exactly what Do-hyun had predicted. Take it to full power, Do-hyun ordered. For a moment, the node's hum became a high-pitched whine. Then it settled into a steady, powerful rhythm. On the bridge's main screen, the test section turned bright green. Power flow at 100%, Mei Ray reported. All systems stable. Temperature within normal ranges. Sir, we did it. A cheer went up from the bridge crew. Do-hyun allowed himself a small smile. Well done, everyone. Begin production of the remaining nodes immediately. Over the next 2 weeks, the crew worked in shifts to install the new power system. Every day, more of the red lines on the main screen turned green. The Perseverance's power core, once restricted to 60% capacity, was finally able to operate at its full potential. But the power system was just the beginning. In Cargo Bay 2, now called the Forge, another team was working on weapons modifications. Jin Ho Kwon, the tactical officer, had discovered that the ship's old point defense lasers could be modified in interesting ways. The original targeting systems were primitive, Jin Ho explained to Do-hyun during an inspection. But that means they're simple. We can reprogram them to work together in ways that modern systems can't match. He demonstrated on a test target. Instead of firing directly at the target, the modified lasers fired in a complex pattern. The beams crossed and combined, creating interference patterns that multiplied their power. Modern shields are designed to block direct energy weapons, Jin Ho said. They're not prepared for this kind of attack. The interference patterns will slip right through their defenses. Do-hyun nodded approvingly. How many of the point defense arrays have been modified? 6 so far. We should have all 12 done by the end of the week. In Cargo Bay 1, now known as the Lab, Navigation Officer Soo Jin-yoon was working on her own projects. The Perseverance's old navigation systems had been designed before modern shield technology existed. Soo Jin had realized this could be an advantage. Modern ships rely on their shields too much, she explained to Jae-won. Their navigation systems assume the shields will protect them. But our old systems were designed to plot courses that actively avoid enemy fire. She showed Jae-won a simulation. In it, the Perseverance danced through a field of enemy fire, its movements precise and unpredictable. We're combining the old evasion protocols with modern prediction algorithms. The ship will be able to dodge attacks before they're even fired. The changes weren't limited to major systems. All over the ship, crew members were finding ways to improve their stations. In the medical bay, Dr. Minho Ba had modified the old diagnostic systems to work faster than modern equipment. In the sensor array, Technician Dahai Kang had found a way to use the ship's outdated scanning systems to detect things that newer sensors missed. 3 months after Project Phoenix began, Do Hyun called a meeting of his senior staff in the conference room. The room's walls were covered with diagrams and technical readouts showing all their modifications. Status reports, Do Hyun said. Engineering first. Nairei stood up. The new power system is fully operational. We're running at 95% efficiency, better than most modern ships. The core can now safely operate at 120% of its rated capacity, with the ability to surge to 150% for short periods. Tactical. Jin-ho spoke next. All weapon systems have been modified and tested. The new firing patterns are working perfectly. We've also installed the makeshift missile launchers in the unused maintenance hatches. They're not as powerful as modern launchers, but they'll surprise anyone who's not expecting them. Navigation. Su Jin smiled. The new evasion systems are online. In simulations, we're showing a 70% improvement in survival rates against modern weapon systems. Medical. Dr. Minho nodded. Sickbay is ready. Our modified systems might be old, but they're faster than anything in the fleet. We can diagnose and treat injuries before modern systems would even finish their initial scans. Very good. Do Hyun looked around the table. You've all done amazing work. This ship may not look like much from the outside, but inside. He smiled. Inside, we're something entirely new. Sir, Jai-Won said, what happens when the Admiral orders our next inspection? All of these modifications are technically legal. Do Hyun finished. I've checked every regulation. We haven't added any unauthorized weapons or systems. We've simply improved what was already here. The regulations for Mark II ships have enough loopholes to fly a battleship through. The crew laughed at that. They'd all become experts at finding those loopholes over the past 3 months. Besides, Do Hyun continued, our next inspection isn't scheduled for 6 months. By then, we'll have proven our worth to the fleet. They may not like our methods, but they won't be able to argue with our results. As if on cue, the ship's alert system activated. Red lights began flashing. Bridge to Captain Park. A voice called over the communicator. Priority message from Fleet Command. All ships are ordered to battle stations. Multiple hostile contacts have entered the system. Do Hyun looked at his crew. They all straightened in their chairs, ready for action. Well, he said, standing up, it looks like we'll get to test our improvements sooner than expected. To your stations, everyone. Let's show them what the weakest ship in the fleet can really do. As the crew hurried to their posts, Do Hyun felt a surge of pride. The Perseverance might look old and worn on the outside, but inside, it had been transformed. They had taken the fleet's cast-off ship and turned it into something unique, a perfect blend of old reliability and new innovation. The battle alerts continued to sound as Do Hyun walked onto the bridge. On the main screen, red dots showed enemy ships approaching the system. The rest of the fleet would expect the Perseverance to stay in the rear, protected by stronger ships. The enemy was about to learn a very important lesson. Never underestimate human ingenuity, and never, ever judge a ship by its appearance. The Perseverance moved into position at the rear of the fleet formation. Through the bridge's main viewport, Do Hyun could see the bigger, newer ships taking their places at the front. Their gleaming hulls and powerful engines made his old ship look even more out of place. Enemy ships identified. Jin-ho reported from the tactical station. Drachnid vessels. 3 heavy cruisers and 4 destroyers. Do Hyun nodded. The Drachnids were known for their advanced technology and aggressive tactics. Their ships carried weapons that could tear through normal shields like paper. That's why they were so confident in attacking with just 7 ships against the 12 ships of the Terran fleet. All stations Report, Du Hyun ordered. Engineering ready. Mai Rei's voice came over the comm. Power systems at optimal levels. All modifications are functioning perfectly. Navigation ready, Soo-jin said from her station. Evasion systems are online and calculating possible enemy movement patterns. Tactical ready, Jin Ho added. All weapons are charged and targeting systems are calibrated. Medical bay standing by, Dr. Minho reported. Jae-won looked up from her station. All crew members are at battle stations. The ship is as ready as it will ever be, sir. The fleet channel crackled to life. All ships, this is Admiral Lee. Enemy vessels are approaching at attack speed. Maintain formation and prepare to engage. Do Hyun watched as the distance between the fleets grew smaller. On the tactical display, he could see the Drachnid ships moving into an arrow formation, their heavy cruisers in the lead. Then something unexpected happened. Sir, Soo-jin called out. The Drachnid ships are powering up their fold space drives. During combat, Jae-won asked, surprised. That's incredibly dangerous. But Do Hyun understood immediately. They're not trying to run. They're going to jump behind our lines. He turned to Soo-jin. Can you predict where they'll emerge? Soo-jin's fingers flew over her console. Yes, sir. Our old sensors are picking up their fold space signatures. Modern ships would miss these readings, but our system was designed to detect even the smallest space distortions. She paused. They're going to appear, right on top of us. Exactly where they think the weakest ship is, Do Hyun said with a small smile. Just as planned. Sir, Jae-won looked confused. Think about it, Do Hyun explained. If you were attacking a fleet, wouldn't you want to take out the weakest ship first? Create panic in the rear lines. He turned to Jin Ho. Weapons free. Use pattern Alpha when they emerge. The space around the Perseverance suddenly twisted and warped. 7 Drachnid ships appeared, their weapons already charging. They had expected to find an easy target. Instead, they found a ship that was ready for them. Evasion pattern Delta, Do Hyun ordered. The Perseverance moved in ways that should have been impossible for a ship its size. Soo-jin's modified navigation systems sent them spinning through space, dodging the first volley of Drachnid weapons fire with ease. Return fire, Do Hyun commanded. Show them what we can do. Jin Ho activated the modified point defense lasers. Instead of firing directly at the enemy ships, the beams crossed and combined in complex patterns. The Drachnid shields, designed to stop powerful direct hits, couldn't handle the interference patterns. Energy leaked through their defenses, causing damage to their hull systems. Direct hit on the Lid cruiser. Jin Ho reported. Their port weapons array is disabled. The Drachnids, surprised by the effectiveness of the attack, split their formation. 2 destroyers moved to flank the Perseverance while the others regrouped for another attack. They're charging their main weapons, Jae-won warned. Engineering. We need more power to the shields, Do Hyun called out. You've got it, Mai Rei responded, pushing the core to 120%, redistributing power through the new grid. The Drachnid ships fired. Their energy weapons, capable of crippling modern ships, struck the Perseverance's shields. But instead of breaking through, something strange happened. The old shield generators, modified with Mai Rei's improvements, absorbed the energy and redistributed it. Shield efficiency at 110%, Jae-won reported, amazed. The attack actually strengthened our defenses. Launch missiles, Do Hyun ordered. Target their blind spots. Hidden panels in the Perseverance's hull opened. The makeshift missile launchers, installed in old maintenance hatches, fired their projectiles. The Drachnids, focused on their main weapons, didn't notice the missiles until it was too late. Explosions rocked the nearest destroyer. Its shields, already weakened by the laser interference patterns, couldn't stop the unexpected attack. The ship's engines failed, leaving it drifting in space. 1 destroyer disabled, Jin Ho reported. The others are regrouping for another attack. The battle continued for 20 minutes. The Perseverance danced through space, its old systems working in ways their designers had never imagined. Every Drachnid attack was met with an unexpected counter. Every time they thought they had the old ship cornered, it would surprise them with another hidden capability. Finally, the Drachnid commander had seen enough. The remaining ships activated their fold space drives and retreated, leaving behind 2 destroyed destroyers and 1 heavily damaged cruiser. As the energy readings of the battle faded, the fleet channel came alive with chatter. The other Terran ships, who had been rushing to help, couldn't believe what they had seen. Perseverance, this is Admiral Lee. The fleet commander's voice was a mixture of shock and disbelief. What? How did you? Just some basic improvements, sir, Du Hyun replied calmly. Nothing that isn't allowed under Mark II regulations. There was a long pause. Then, surprisingly, the Admiral laughed. Basic improvements. You just took on 7 Drachnid ships by yourself and won. I don't think basic is the word for it. Do Hyun looked around his bridge. Ji-won was grinning. Su Jin and Jin Ho were exchanging high fives. From engineering, he could hear Mai Rei and Yi Jun cheering. Request permission to return to formation, sir, Du Hyun said. Granted, Admiral Lee replied. And well done. Perseverance. Very well done indeed. As they moved back into position, Du Hyun received damage reports from around the ship. Despite the intensity of the battle, they had suffered only minor damage. The old ship, written off as obsolete by so many, had proven itself in the most dramatic way possible. Message from engineering, Jai-won said. Mai Rei wants you to know that the power core performed better than expected. She says we could probably push it to 160% in the next battle. Next battle. Du Hyun raised an eyebrow. Let's hope the Drachnids learned their lesson about judging ships by their appearance. Somehow, I don't think they're the only ones who learned a lesson today, Jai-won replied, looking at the fleet channel where messages of congratulation were still pouring in. Do Hyun nodded. The Perseverance had been transformed from the fleet's greatest embarrassment into something unprecedented. A ship that combined the reliability of old technology with the innovation of human engineering. And this was just the beginning. Send a message to all hands, he ordered. Well done, everyone. But don't celebrate too long. Tomorrow, we start working on more improvements. The crew's answering cheer could be heard throughout the ship. The Perseverance, once considered the weakest ship in the fleet, had found its strength, not in raw power or advanced technology, but in the creativity and determination of its human crew. And somewhere in space, 7 Drachnid ships were carrying a message back to their fleet. Beware of old human ships. They're full of surprises. 3 months after the battle with the Drachnid ships, the Perseverance sat in a special dock at Terra Space Command. Engineers and officers from across the fleet came to study the ship that had changed everything. Du Hyun watched from his ready room window as another group of visitors arrived. That's the 5th inspection team this week, Jai-won said, bringing him a cup of coffee. I never thought we'd become this popular. Do Hyun smiled. The battle recording had spread through the fleet like wildfire. Everyone wanted to know how an old Mark II support vessel had defeated 7 Drachnid warships. The story had inspired other ships to look at their own systems in new ways. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Admiral Lee entered, looking very different from the man who had tried to end Du Hyun's career 4 months ago. Captain Park, the Admiral said, emphasizing Du Hyun's new rank. The promotion had come through 2 weeks after the battle. The engineering board has finished their review of your modifications. Do Hyun stood up straighter. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The board could still declare their modifications illegal and order them removed. They've approved everything, Admiral Lee continued, smiling. In fact, they want to create a new engineering program based on your work. They're calling it the Phoenix Protocol, taking old systems and finding new ways to use them. Jai-won let out a small cheer, then quickly composed herself. Sorry, Sir, don't apologize, Admiral Lee said. You should be celebrating. What your crew achieved is remarkable. He handed Do-hyun a tablet. These are the latest fleet orders. You'll want to read them yourself. Do-hyun looked at the tablet, and his eyes widened. Sir, is this correct? They want to create an entire division of upgraded ships. Correct. The Phoenix division will focus on taking older vessels and applying your modification principles to them. Chief Engineer Song has been promoted to Division Chief Engineer. She'll oversee all the upgrades personally. In engineering, Mireille was showing a group of fleet engineers through the workshop. The space had been cleaned up but still showed signs of the intense work that had happened there. The key was thinking differently about the old systems, she explained. Modern ships try to overpower every problem. We found ways to work smarter, not harder. One of the visiting engineers raised his hand. But weren't you worried about system failures? These modifications weren't tested. That's where the Mark II design helped us. Yi-jun answered from his workstation. These old ships were built with huge safety margins. The original engineers expected them to work for decades with minimal maintenance. We just found new ways to use that reliability. In the medical bay, Dr. Minho was teaching other fleet doctors about their modified diagnostic systems. Modern equipment is powerful but complex, he explained. Our old systems are simpler, so we could make them work faster. In battle, speed saves lives. On the bridge, Su-jin and Jin-ho were running combat simulations for a group of tactical officers. The visitors watched in amazement as the Perseverance's systems worked together in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The trick is cooperation, Jin-ho explained. Modern ships have powerful individual systems that work alone. We made our systems work together, supporting each other's strengths and covering weaknesses. The changes weren't limited to the fleet. News of the Perseverance's victory had reached civilian engineering schools. Students were now studying the ship's modifications as examples of innovative thinking. The phrase Perseverance-class solution had become slang for solving a problem in an unexpected way. Even the Drachnids had been affected. Their fleet commanders had completely changed their tactics after the battle. They no longer assumed that older human ships were easy targets. Every Terran vessel, no matter its age, was now treated as a potential threat. 1 month later, Do-hyun stood in front of a classroom at the Space Force Academy. The room was packed with cadets eager to learn from the captain who had changed fleet doctrine. The most important lesson, he told them, isn't about the technical details. It's about perspective. Every system, no matter how old or simple, has potential. The key is looking at problems differently and not being afraid to try new solutions. A cadet raised her hand. Sir, what would you say to people who think older technology should just be replaced? Do-hyun thought about the Perseverance, about how close it had come to being scrapped. Technology is just a tool, he answered. What matters is how you use it. Sometimes the old tools, used in new ways, can work better than the newest technology. After the lecture, Do-hyun walked through the Academy's halls with Admiral Lee. The walls were now decorated with pictures of the Perseverance alongside newer ships. The first 3 Phoenix Division ships will be ready next month, the Admiral said. We're starting with Mark III and IV vessels, but we're already looking at applying your principles to newer ships too. The crew will be pleased to hear that, Do-hyun replied. They've been worried that all their hard work would only help old ships. Oh, it's helping everything, Admiral Lee laughed. Every ship in the fleet is being reviewed for possible improvements. Engineers are looking at systems in completely new ways. You've started a revolution, Captain. Do-hyun smiled. The crew started it. Sir, I just gave them the chance to prove what they could do. Back on the Perseverance, the crew was preparing for their next mission. The ship looked different now. Its hull had been repaired and strengthened, but they had kept the worn appearance. It was a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. Message from Fleet Command. Jae-won reported as Do-hyun returned to the bridge. They're asking if we'd be willing to escort the first group of Phoenix Division ships on their shakedown cruise. Tell them we'd be honored, Do Hyun replied, settling into his captain's chair. He looked around at his crew, remembering how uncertain they had been just months ago. Now they were teachers, innovators, pioneers. The Perseverance's engines hummed to life, their sound a perfect blend of old reliability and new innovation. As they moved away from the station, other ships in the dock flashed their running lights in salute. The ship that had once been called the fleet's weakest vessel had become something else entirely, a symbol of human ingenuity and a reminder that true strength comes in many forms. Course laid in, sir, Soo-jin reported. The Phoenix Division ships will rendezvous with us at the system edge. Very good, Do-hyun said. Take us out, standard speed. He smiled. Let's show them what the future looks like. The Perseverance moved gracefully into space, its worn hull hiding its true nature. It wasn't just a ship anymore. It was a legend, a teacher, and a promise that human creativity and determination could transform anything, no matter how old or outdated, into something extraordinary. And somewhere in the depths of space, young officers on other ships looked at their own outdated systems and began to wonder, what if we tried something different? What if we stopped seeing old technology as a weakness and started seeing it as an opportunity? The revolution had begun, and it started with a single old ship that refused to be called weak.